The question of normality becomes nuanced the moment we learn that the term itself can be weaponized to maximize obedience and benefit those in control. At some point, one has to ask, is being normal in a society this sick the right way to be? Is being a proper, high-functioning citizen a virtue or cowardice? Is going through life just like everyone else wise or foolish? When you look in the mirror, do you see someone living on his own terms, no matter how improper those terms might be, or someone desperately trying to mold himself to match societal expectations? Randle McMurphy, played by Jack Nicholson, was certainly not the latter. If anything, he was one of the lost, outdated men. The cowboys, the rebels, the fortune seekers who had inherited the American continent some 300 years earlier. And now here he was in 1960s America, where his instincts, behavior, and the very way of being were considered not just unfit, but insane. But if McMurphy was insane then, what is normal? Cultural anthropologists have long known that norms are not objective. They are local, temporal, and political. Just a few centuries ago, it was considered entirely normal for children to work long hours in dangerous factory conditions. Any attempt to remove them from labor was met with public outrage and resistance. Corporal punishment was the norm. Slavery was legal and fiercely defended by both church and science. The mentally ill were locked in asylums, often chained to walls and subjected to cruel treatments. From the 1940s through the 1960s, doctors tried to treat same-sex attractions by applying painful and unpleasant stimuli, including electric shocks, chemical aversion therapy, verbal abuse, and other painful stimuli, such as snapping rubber bands on the afflicted person's wrists. Public executions were once considered normal, even entertaining. These were the norms, sanctioned, institutionalized, and enforced. And so the very definition of normal largely depends on what the majority are willing to accept as such. Fast forward to today, people who fail to adapt to the current way of living often end up in the streets with no health insurance, no care, no hope. We assume it's their fault for ending up this way without so much as even considering their past. Meanwhile, billionaires continue to weasel their way through the system, untouched by scandal after scandal, hoarding the majority of all wealth, while half of Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings. About 9 million work more than one job just to survive, and over 27 million are left without any form of health insurance. Fentanyl overdoses have become a norm, and the corporations responsible for this mess aren't just draining people. They're draining the planet, poisoning rivers, clear-cutting forests, dumping waste into oceans, lobbying against clean water laws. They slash, burn, and extract whatever they want, knowing they'll never be held accountable. We've come to accept it all as normal. We keep scrolling, keep consuming, keep buying their products, because what else are we supposed to do? The machine keeps on running, and we keep moving with it. People who struggle to sit still for 8 hours in rigid classrooms or offices are often diagnosed with ADHD, depression, or anxiety and are prescribed medicine. Medicine, according to Merriam-Webster, is a substance or preparation used in treating disease. And so by definition, medicine is something we use to treat disease. But what is the disease that we wish to cure in this particular case? Am I really a sick person if I simply refuse to want to take part in the consumerist system? Is not wanting to be a drone in a soul-sucking 9-to-5 really that insane? Do I really have to be treated with stimulating and sedating pills in order to fit the definition of normal? And this is the reality shared by a sixth of Americans. According to CDC data, around 42 million people regularly take antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. About 5 million adults now rely on ADHD stimulants, and so do another 3 to 5 million children, some as young as 6. Altogether, it's estimated that over 50 million Americans adults and children take one or more of these medications each year. But what if we have simply strayed too far from our nature? What if something we have normalized as mental illness is just the human soul colliding with an inflexible, oppressive system? What if inability to function properly is a natural reaction to a system that is unwilling to acknowledge that human beings are not made to slave their time away in pointless, never-ending labor just to meet some arbitrary Excel sheet estimates? Of course, that is not to say that all diagnoses are incorrect, but 50 million people? The rest of us are appeased with easy entertainment, endless doom-scrolling, and distraction. So, who sets the boundaries on what is normal? And are these boundaries set out of the best interests of the people, or perhaps out of greed, ignorance, and fear?
We came, we saw, he died.
Normal is often mistaken for good. In democratic societies, we assume that majority rule leads to just outcomes. Yet history repeatedly shows that the majority can be gravely wrong. Stonings, witch burnings, slavery, all were once considered normal. The real danger lies in mistaking what is normal for what is moral. And when norms are shaped not by truth, but by fear, ignorance, or institutional interests, the result is a society where sickness becomes the norm. As Jiddu Krishnamurti observed, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. True conscience begins when we question whether our norms serve justice, like in the case of McMurphy, or merely protect power, like in the case of Nurse Ratched. And the majority has a rather nasty record when it comes to enforcing the norms. Galileo was placed under house arrest for proving that the Earth revolved around the Sun. Ignaz Semmelweis, the physician who discovered that hand-washing drastically reduced death during childbirth, was mocked by the medical establishment, driven out of his position, and eventually thrown into an asylum, where he died, beaten down and destroyed by the normal part of society. But insight and nonconformity have rarely been welcome in systems built to preserve power. Why? Well, because those who are conscious enough to question societal norms in favor of truth are a danger to those in control. And the unfortunate reality is that the ones in control are very good at using the masses to gaslight the few who dare to think free. Throughout history, systems have relied not just on direct force, but on the manipulation of the masses to crush anyone who dares to wake others up. They don't just silence the outlier, they turn the crowd against him. This is how oppressive systems always have worked. They isolate the truth speaker, smear him, and then weaponize the fear and conformity of the crowd. In Stalinist Russia, writers like Mikhail Bulgakov and Osip Mandelstam did not rebel. Their crime was that of simply daring to feel, to imagine, and to awaken that spark in others. The state didn't need to shoot them publicly. Instead, it fed the public a diet of loyalty, paranoia, and conformity. Artists and intellectuals became enemies of the people. In Mao's China, the Cultural Revolution turned students against their own teachers and parents. Youth brigades were convinced they were defending truth, but they were pawns used to destroy intellectuals and anyone who asked questions. Like Nurse Ratched, these regimes didn't necessarily need violence. They created environments where the crowd would do the policing for them, where people would beg for their own chains and cheer as anyone who resisted was dragged away. And that's because, in the end, that is the trick of control. The most powerful and successful oppressive systems don't just dominate, they convince the people to fear their own freedom. And that's exactly what Nurse Ratched did to those in her ward. She trained her subordinates to fear her. She conditioned them to become completely dependent on her mood, to a point where they would shiver and hide their eyes from her very gaze. Instead of helping her patients, she molded them into her own perfect creation, a herd of terrified, obedient sheep who no longer trust themselves to think without her consent. Like totalitarian regimes, she pretends her actions are for the common good. In reality, she's manipulating the group's dependence on her, ensuring no one ever steps too far out of line. The first time we see Nurse Ratched on a screen, she appears in a space between the outside, free world, and the closed-off psychiatric ward. The shot puts her behind a security gate with a red light above her head. The red light is warning of danger. She opens the gate and enters dressed all in black, tall and menacing, like a beast let out of a cage. The character of Nurse Ratched can be seen as a representation of the robotic, soulless system devoid of compassion and understanding. Or, as I see her, as an equally remorseless enforcer of the system, akin to the agents in the Matrix, not inherently evil, simply programmed to uphold the rule by any means necessary. And so, Nurse Ratched is more than just a cruel nurse. She's an extension of a system that rewards conformity and punishes any sign of free will. Her power is rooted not in strength, but in weakness, in fear of losing whatever power she was ascribed by those in control. Nurse Ratched is a perfect example of insecurity masked by controlling and abusive behavior. She has followed the system. She conformed when a system pushed her to conform. She killed her inner child when a system told her that this was the only way. She was most certainly as great a pupil as she is now a worker. She did everything to please the master, and in doing so, she's lost her own sense of identity. Her identity is her conformity, and so she herself becomes the prisoner of fear. Fear of losing control, and by extension, losing her very identity. She believes in routine because routine is predictable. Like a machine, her cogs get jammed whenever a disruptor like Randle McMurphy appears. Predictability allows for control. There is no room in her world for spontaneity, play, or rebellion. Even an innocent request to watch the World Series becomes a threat to her structure and her entire being. Ratched is a psychological archetype of authoritarianism. She rules with a calm voice and cold detachment, a smile masking coercion. Her power is not earned, it's institutional. She is protected by the machinery of the hospital, which values order over justice, sedation over healing. But the real danger in Nurse Ratched is that she's not any different than you or I. Ratched isn't innately evil. She's a product of a system trained to prioritize order over empathy, normality over morality. Her fear of losing control mirrors how we all risk becoming agents when we cling to routine or authority. Nurse Ratched is the system's perfect creation. Nurse Ratched lives in every single one of us. Think of all the teachers who punish boys for being too loud, too active, instead of trying to understand them and channeling their energy and spirit in a creative, constructive way. They show a complete lack of empathy, as if they didn't understand that it's only natural for boys their age to be full of energy and vigor. It's as if they didn't understand that it's completely contrary to what they are to sit still at a desk and stare motionless at a page full of text. But the systemic oppression of those who don't conform does not stop at school. Think of all the managers who promote the most obedient, not the most insightful. Think of the bureaucracies that function by ignoring human nuance in favor of tidy spreadsheets. Like the agents in the Matrix, Nurse Ratched is everywhere. In his book, Ordinary Men, Christopher Browning details a historical study of a unit of average German reserve police officers during World War II. The book follows ordinary, middle-aged working-class men who were by no means considered Nazis or psychopaths. Yet, over time, they became willing participants in mass shootings and atrocities against civilians in occupied Poland. Browning's book shows how social pressure, obedience to authority, and the dehumanizing environment of the Nazi regime transformed these ordinary men into perpetrators of some of the most horrific violence in history. It illustrates that cruelty is not just committed by monsters, but more often than not, by regular people who conform to faulty systems. Just like in The Matrix, we all have an agent within us. Just like in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, we all have a nurse Ratched within us. In Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, conducted at Yale University in the 1960s, participants were instructed by a researcher in a lab coat to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to another person whenever they answered a question incorrectly. That person was actually an actor and was not really being shocked. Despite the actor's screams, pleas to stop, and eventual silence, which indicated death, a majority of participants continued to administer shocks simply because the authority figure wearing a white coat insisted they do so. The study revealed a disturbing truth. Ordinary people are capable of committing acts they would normally find unthinkable, including murder, simply because they are told so by someone in a position of authority. That's the world Ratched cultivates, a world where obedience becomes moral and free thinking becomes madness. If you enjoy this sort of content, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really helps me develop my small channel and continue doing what I love. Chief Bromden is the soul of the story, a Native American man who pretends to be deaf and mute to survive. But his silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. He understands that the system is not capable of hearing his call, that his words are wasted on those who cannot comprehend truth beyond policy. He's quietly accepted his fate. Chief's father was once a tribal leader. Now he's an alcoholic ghost, erased by assimilation and grief. His identity and the very way of being were deemed abnormal and dismantled. Policies, such as the Indian boarding school system, forcibly removed native children from their families and forbade them from speaking their languages or practicing their traditions. The Dawes Act of 1887 and the termination policies of the 1950s further stripped tribes of land and legal recognition. These efforts to civilize indigenous populations tore apart the very fabric of their cultures. A population that wouldn't adhere to the norms was methodically removed from the system and destroyed. And it shows. American Indian and Alaska Native population's suicide rate is 71% higher than average. Drug overdose death rates among these populations reached 65 per 100,000 in 2023, over twice the national average. These are not genetic flaws. These are psychic wounds of cultural destruction passed down through generations of forced displacement, assimilation, and systemic neglect. These are the wounds that Chief embodies, and yet he also embodies resilience. His watchful eyes see more than anyone else in the world. He knows who McMurphy is, even before McMurphy knows it himself. And McMurphy? He's the last wild man, a trickster figure in a sterile world, a much-needed disruptor in his perfectly organized system. He gambles, he drinks, he laughs. He fights for pleasure, creates chaos through as little as his presence, and resists the oppression not out of calculated need, but out of sheer instinct. He is the embodiment of unfiltered masculine energy, of frontier spirit without a frontier. A cowboy dropped into the bureaucratic machine of mid-century America, where passion is pathologized and rebellion is reclassified as madness. In a sense, he's one of the last men who are still truly alive. And by no means is he perfect. All he is simply human. But beneath that wild exterior lies something even more dangerous to Nurse Ratched and the system she represents. Love. McMurphy doesn't just rebel. He connects. He laughs with the patients, treats them like men, not cases. He sees through their fear, their silence, their shame. Where Ratched sees liabilities, McMurphy sees potential. He lifts them up, not with lectures, but with invitation. He invites them to risk, to play, to feel. The fishing trip, the party, the bet to lift the control panel. These aren't just stunts. The radical acts of trust, moments when he tells the others, in effect, "You're not broken, you are still alive." This is what enrages Ratched the most, not just that he disobeys, but that he empowers others to feel alive. And she sees it, the laughter, the questions, the tiny awakenings. He's disrupting the architecture of a power that depends on shame, fear, and complete submission. In the beginning of the film, we are shown a deceptively peaceful atmosphere of everyday life in a psychiatric ward before the arrival of McMurphy. A calm classical record is playing in the background as patients come to take their daily pill in a perfect harmony of complete obedience. This scene mirrors a curated society that has learned to accept its fate to a point of seeing sedation and limitations of freedom as completely normal. All of this changes, however, once a disruptor enters the scene and reminds everyone that they are, in fact, prisoners. They have simply forgotten about it. Unlike the others, McMurphy doesn't accept this place and its rules. He doesn't allow them to condition him. He doesn't take the treatment. After a while, he understands that these men have been conditioned, brainwashed, scared to submission. And once he does, he turns from a rebel without a cause to a rebel with one. He sees right through Nurse Ratched. He sees her for who she is, a fearful, powerless, insecure enforcer of the rules. At one point in the film, McMurphy holds an open window, offering his inmates to escape along with him. The freedom is right there. All they have to do is reach out for it. But nothing happens. McMurphy has underestimated Nurse Ratched's influence once more. Billy stutters and trembles. He looks for excuses. He won't go. Chief stands idly by the window. One by one, they all shrink back. Not because they're physically locked in, but because they've been conditioned to believe they can't exist outside. They believe the lie that they need the system to survive. And that's the tragedy. The door has always been open in some form. In fact, the majority of inpatients are there on their own volition and could leave at will. But over time, they became sedated and pruned to stay. The very same way you and I have been pruned to stay within the rigid constraints of the system. We've learned that fighting against it is futile, and so we've chosen to survive within it. Like Chief Bromden, we've chosen to pretend to be deaf and mute, just to survive. But McMurphy doesn't leave either. Why? Well, at that point he understood. He's no longer just an outlaw trying to dodge prison labor by spending some jolly old time with a couple of nutcases. Before he knows it, he now genuinely cares. He sees what the oppression has done to his fellow inmates. He knows it's not right. He feels responsible for young Billy Bibbit, Chief, and the others. At this point, he's no longer just rebelling for himself. He's become a protector, almost a sacrificial figure. He knows that if he leaves now, the others may collapse under Ratched's grip once again. And tragically, that's exactly what happens. The system breaks the most sensitive, innocent victim as Billy is shamed into suicide. Ratched knows exactly where to push, and when Billy experiences joy, when he finally breaks free and his stuttering stops even for a brief moment, she reminds him of his biggest fear, his mother. She doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't restrain him, she just reminds him who holds the strings. And that's what makes her so dangerous. The brother system works in the same manner. It keeps us in check not with force, but with quiet control. It whispers, "Do you want food, shelter, love and care? Then play by the rules." It keeps us in check through credit card debt, rent, and the sole need for survival. Its deadlines, metrics, and the fear of being left behind. The system smiles at you. It enslaves you. It rewards you for your obedience. It kills you for your rebellion. Just like Ratched, McMurphy is not just a patient, he's a symbol of everything the institution can't control. If Chief is the wisdom of the old world, then McMurphy is its last dying heartbeat. and the system can't tolerate either one of them. The climax of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is not a twist, it's a verdict. The record player sings its regular tune. The dynamic has been reset. Nurse Ratched is back in control. The men are her obedient, toothless, perfect sheep once again. The system has won. There is no sign of rebellion. There is no sign of freedom. McMurphy is lobotomized. Not because he posed a direct threat, but because he had the audacity to stand for what is right in the face of what is normal. He showed the patients what life could feel like. He showed them laughter, freedom, courage, and for that, he had to be destroyed. The system has removed what it couldn't control. In this case, it was McMurphy's brain. And what is lobotomy if not a metaphor for the modern condition? We no longer need scalpels. We have medication, distraction, endless scrolling, porn, video games. We have normalized sedation. Rather than interrogating the system that produces suffering, we numb ourselves to survive within it. In many ways, we live in an open-air asylum. The numbers must go up. But not all is lost. Chief Bromden lifts McMurphy's body, now a hollow shell, and smothers him. An act of mercy and liberation. He sees that his spirit has been destroyed. Rather than let him live in that state, Chief chooses to suffocate him and honor the men who once freed him. It's both a mercy killing and an act of final rebellion. An assertion that the institution may have broken McMurphy's body, but it won't own his soul. And then Chief does the unthinkable. He lifts the control panel, he smashes the window, and he runs. He reclaims his voice, his strength, his freedom. And that is the third path. Not conformity, not death, but the courage to reach for freedom. Escape from lies, escape from sedation, escape from a world that calls submission sanity. The moment you challenge the consensus, you risk being labeled as deviant, unstable, or broken. The boy who can't sit still is punished or medicated. The girl who stares blankly at the window is scolded. The artist, the introvert, the dreamer, they're all sanded down to fit. As psychologist Gabor Mate writes, the child does not learn to be himself. He learns to be acceptable. And so we begin to perform, to camouflage, to lie. We learn that survival means surrendering who we are, because we know that if we fail to fit in, we might just end up being too much like Randle McMurphy for society's taste. The name Tyler Durden hits different. 25 years later, Tyler isn't just a fictional character. He continues to be an icon for every young guy who's ever looked at modern life and said, "Is this it?" And there are more disenchanted, pissed off young men than most of us would like to admit. While Instagram influencers sell you morning routines, optimization hacks, and how to get rich schemes, Tyler offers something more radical. A